Jeff Campos, Global Chamber, and welcome to Strategies to Meet More Investors from Your Capital Raise. And we have a couple of great speakers tonight. I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. But as many of you know, most entrepreneurs understand that the fundamentals of a business idea, the management team, the market opportunities, the operating systems, the controls they may have are sound. Chances are they'll have an opportunity to get money out there. Except the challenge of landing the capital to grow a company can be very exhilarating. But as exciting as the money search may be, it's equally threatening. Built in the process are certain harsh realities that can seriously damage a business. So entrepreneurs cannot escape them, but by knowing what they are, can at least prepare them for it. And today we have Greg Tanner, founder and managing partner of Aspen Capital. Greg helps startups and existing businesses create successful capital raise and investor relation strategies. Also, we have Toby Armitage, Senior Vice President with Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. Toby will be contributing on the conversation by addressing the topics that are part of the capital raise and the ultimate liquidity of an enterprise, touching on the presentation of your business and personal balance sheets and establishing a valuation. So let's get that opportunity to hear from both of our speakers today. And let's start with Greg. Welcome.
Hi everyone. Thanks for taking time today to listen, and I hope that you find that we have some excellent ideas. And obviously, I think because I do this every day, I see common pitfalls, but most of all, I have lots of great ideas for people, and it's taken me over 15 years to learn how to do a good cap raise, and it's changing and evolving. It's evolved extremely fast in the last 3 or 4 months to more virtual, like things like this. So I think we have some good conversation to talk through with my colleague Toby. Toby is a next slide, please. We'll kind of go through the agenda here. Can I get the next slide? Thanks. So we're going to have kind of a more conversational presentation, but we'll do a brief intro and then really talk about how an investor is created and why you should care. And then we'll talk about the cliche and how to avoid trial and error, and then really kind of talk through some strategies to get more investors involved in your network. And then we'll have a Q&A session. So I know we always have a lot of questions as we go through this. Next slide, please. So really kind of, I talk about the circle of wealth and why it's important to understand it. So basically, I'd like to start with kind of what investors are looking for when they're going to invest in a company. And I'll let Toby chime in here in a second, but really kind of who writes the check. And in this picture, this is an angel investor investing in a company called Total, and they do cybersecurity in Mexico. And the investor himself had an exit a handful of years ago, a very, very successful entrepreneur. And so he was probably in the same shoes these guys were at one point, and then exited. There's a process in which you exit, and then he started to realize that not just that he had the money to do it, but he also wanted to help entrepreneurs realize their dreams, and also make money, because it's all about making money, right? An investment has returns. So Toby, why don't you talk a little bit about what investors look for in a company when they're starting out, and kind of that kind of life cycle there.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Hello, everyone. Toby Armitage, as Jeff mentioned, from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. In preparing for this, Greg and I, the intent is really to work into a conversation with the participants on the call. So we're going to spend, 20, maybe 30 minutes kind of monologuing. And between Greg and I having a bit of a conversation about about how to prepare your company, considerations for investors, those types of thoughts. So please keep in mind that my comments are meant to foster conversation. We will have a Q&A once we get done with our comments. Additionally, please know that I am with Merrill's private bank. I'm not an investment banker or a commercial banker, but I do have 22 years working with emerging growth companies, helping them navigate to grow toward an ultimate liquidity event. So I have three main topics I wanted to cover initially, with a little bit of detail behind each one. So those three topics are preparing your business for capital raise or sale. The second is, what form does your ideal capital partner represent? And the third topic is, the best investors are partners. So let me drill down a little bit on those three. So the first, again, preparing your business for capital raise or sale. And these are thoughts and considerations. The first is the depth of experience exhibited by your executive team. These are things that a potential investor is going to be looking for. Some of them are obvious, maybe some of them are not as obvious, and I'll try to cover both.
Toby, one of the things I'd like to say here about the team is that you may not have the pedigree as an entrepreneur. So you may not be like a Harvard grad or a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, but you can recruit those types of people onto your team that will magnify your ability to do your capital raise. So I think I just wanted to jump in and say that, because a lot of people think that they've got to pay that advisor, but there are people out there that want to be advisors on a board without you having to open your wallet.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So depth and experience of the executive team. Investors are going to be looking for industry tenure. They're going to be looking for past successes. They're going to be looking for alignment between the industry experience that executive team has and their roles and contributions to company strategy. So how well aligned is the company strategy to your executive team's experience? The second thought on preparing your business for capital raise is a clearly articulated execution strategy. Why will your company be successful? These are questions that I might suggest you ask yourself. Competitive differentiators. How are you different than other companies? If you're unique and you don't have competitors, and therefore you don't have a proven track record or maybe known track record using peers, again, why will your company be successful? And the third main point under preparing your business is operational efficiency. Where are the operational bottlenecks in your processes, your service, or product that you're providing to the marketplace? How does your balance sheet compare to industry standards and competitors? And that's a difficult comment or bullet point. I do have a response to it if that's a point of interest. Are there areas that can be further fine-tuned to maximize margins and cash flow? I've run into examples recently, even modifying accounts payable timelines can place a company in a more lendable position. So restructuring balance sheet methodologies and timeframes can influence your cash flows, maybe obviously, and put you in a better lending position. So if there are questions, we can cover more detail later. Okay, so the second topic I wanted to cover was, what form does your ideal capital partner represent? Do you simply need cash? Do you have a clearly defined execution strategy? So maybe you just need capital, maybe not. Strategic partner with existing portfolio of complementary partners might be an important criteria for an investor for you as a business owner. What level of equity dilution are you willing to give up? What is your criteria? Differentiated equity dilution based upon investor value add, and what does that look like? If there's not much maybe value add, maybe you're less willing to give up equity. If there's more value add strategically, maybe you're willing to give up more. Another thought is debt financing a possibility, or maybe best suited for your needs? No dilution, but drain on cash flow, possibly. And maybe another, maybe not the last, but is grant money a possible option for you? It's not dilutive, which is a positive, but it's not strategic also. So what form does your ideal capital partner represent? You know, all these factors might go into that decision in identifying, you know, a best fit investor for your company. Greg, the last topic I wanted to cover, at least for now, was the best investors are often partners. And maybe consider aligning your needs with your investor interests. So investors are investing in your company to get a return on their investment. They're going to be typically very concerned with time to sale. Some investors, maybe not so much. Some investors simply want to clip a distribution. Other investors want more of an equity stake and are then incentivized to help you move toward an ultimate sale of your company. And what do those timeframes look like? Are your investors' timeframes aligned with yours? Establishing realistic growth projections. I'm always a believer of under promise and over deliver. Investors can really become a drag on your time if your interests are not aligned. I've run into countless scenarios where business owners are consumed with sort of preparing for the next board meeting, preparing for the next investor call, and it often is attributed back to a misalignment between your company objectives and your investor objectives. I'm sure there are other topics, but those are some that came to mind just to initiate conversation. So for that, Greg, I'm going to hand it back to you and let you lead us through the rest of the presentation materials. Thank you.
Yeah, so Toby's got a really kind of sophisticated view of how that works. And when I had my first liquid event, it's kind of a learning process. So when you understand what he talks about, it's at the end of your entrepreneurial cycle, but it's very important to understand because that's where you want to go. And investors will want you to go that route as well. So understanding what your ideal investor looks like, right, is really the most important way that you're going to attract capital. So understanding what the thesis is of the investor that and then by thesis is what do they invest into? Do they invest in industrial companies? Do they invest in t-shirt companies? Do they do cannabis? Do they specialize in one thing? Understanding that is gonna speed up your flywheel. A lot of entrepreneurs will just kind of run around and start looking at investors, and then the second thing you talked about is what I call the trust trifecta. And so that's what kind of experience do you have in the industry? What kind of opportunity do you have? And then your ability to execute that. So those were really good points that you brought up, Toby. So let's go on to the next slide, please. And we'll talk about what you hear all the time. It takes money to make money. So one of the things I see I mean, there's a lot of opportunities out there for you to take the bull by the horns and get your startup bootstrapped and get it going. But eventually you need money to actually do a capital raise, because you'll probably need to pay for some sort of roadshow, some sort of presentation, and getting your opportunity brushed up and buttoned up so that you can go out and look for an investor and show that investor that you have an opportunity that's valid and real. Let's go to the next slide. So the next thing I see a lot of is this trial and error. And this is the perfect example, because what happens is this has been going on for a long time, except now that COVID's come around, it's changed a lot. Basically, you say, hey, I've got an idea. And then I'm going to go to a bunch of networking events. I'm going to talk to a bunch of people. And then hopefully I'll meet an investor. And then I'll pitch that investor. And if I do that enough, I'll actually end up getting the funds that I need for my investor. So that's kind of the old school way now. It's called trial and error. Next slide, please. The way that we do it now is really creating an investor funnel, and it's not really magical. It's, instead of chasing consumers down, you're chasing an investor down, and moving them through the life cycle of a sales funnel. And so why this is important, because basically one or none of your competitors, if you're out raising money, is doing this. They're doing it the old-fashioned way. I think people now with COVID are starting to adopt this, but they're still having a challenge. And so this is how we build trust, the trust trifecta online. Rather than going to meetings or having lunches, you've got to create authority online. And how do you do that? You do it through your online presence, building the fact that you're an expert in the industry, or your team is, and solving the problem that you are uniquely prepared to solve. And then understanding that ideal investor and then how you're going to target them. Where do those ideal investors hang out? How do they communicate? How do you get those meetings, especially now that you can't go to networking meetings, right? And you want to make a connection on all networks. You're going to be a successful capital raise person with an investor if you become their Facebook friends, because an investor knows if they become your Facebook friend, they're going to see who you really are. So I always tell people, like, if you can get an investor and get them to be your friend on Facebook, it's fabulous. Just, it's a great way to build trust, because that's the last circle of trust you're going to get to. And obviously learning how to use your investor list is really important. Email automation. We live in a time now where you can basically cold email anyone. I mean, you can find anyone's email using automation tools. There's a handful of those. So if you know the format of the email and the person's name, you can generally get their email. And if you can remember back in the old days when we had phone books, you could actually call anyone that was listed in the phone book. So I liken this way to contact and cold email investors is a way that in 10, 15 years, people are going to laugh when you say, hey, remember when we could do cold emails? Really interesting piece. And then at the end of this funnel, you get meetings and you get to talk with your investor and you're successful. Next slide, please. So one of the things that the biggest mistakes I see a lot of is people think I've got a great idea and people are going to invest in it. So really that's not, and this is perfect. If you have a good idea and no execution, it's worth $20. But if you have a weak idea and brilliant execution, it's going to be worth $10 million. So I always tell entrepreneurs, make sure that you can execute on what your idea is, and that's again back to the trust trifecta: industry, opportunity, and then the ability to execute. Next slide, please. So as I talked earlier before, it's a numbers game. the numbers game is all about how your ideal investor, what that looks like. And you need basically 60 to 100 of those ideal investors. And once you've got those 60 or 90, then it's a matter of how much times you touch that investor. Generally, you're going to touch those investors about 6 or 7 times to get a meeting. And then you want to have anywhere from Doc's end, anywhere from 26 to 35 meetings. And at that point, you should have a successful capital raise. Conversely, if you have about 20 meetings or so, and you get a lot of no's, it's generally maybe the way your deck is arranged or you're presenting, or very possible your opportunity isn't viable. So it's good to understand the numbers, and there's a lot of data about how to pitch, and the numbers and what the work needs to get done. A lot of things about pitch decks that I like to talk about is it's not a monologue. It's actually immerse and converse, something that we teach at Aspen Capital Fund. It's learning how to pitch and learning how to get the investor excited about you and building that trust factor in a very short time. Next slide, please. I like to always say uniquely customized. So don't make your deck look the same. So here are various opportunities. These are one-pagers that look actually really great, and they're all next slide. So always be in a sub niche. I always tell entrepreneurs to really, how do you focus? I think that most people always say, well, we want to get, if we just get 1% of the market. Don't ever say that out loud in a meeting. It's a good way to end that investor's interest. So if you can focus on the niches and really control that market space and show how they're going to control that market space, it's a great way, because what you've done is you've really marketed yourself into a niche where competition will have a very difficult time also getting into that niche, and you can dominate that market. Next slide. So one of the things that we've been really interesting about, especially during this time, is direct marketing. And actually, I had one company did a direct mail campaign and was very successful in reaching an investor and working through the deal, getting the interest and getting there. So if you can imagine, investors get anywhere from 300 to 400 pitches a week, and then they take maybe 6 or 7 meetings a week. And to stand out, how many, they probably don't read 300 pitch decks or one-pagers, but if they got something in the mail, how many things do you think, how many items in the mail do you think an investor gets? So it's a great way to get their attention. The other thing I always talk about when getting investors in all your networks is I say follow them on Twitter, or follow them wherever they publish their ideas or share their ideas, and follow them and make sure that they understand that they know who you are, and follow up with either a direct mail piece or an email on saying, hey, we met on Twitter. I'm the guy with the black Labrador, and I know you like dogs, and then you can start to get their attention that way. So I think direct mail is still relevant, maybe even more relevant now than ever. Next slide. So again, I talk about thought leadership, which is basically super social validation, right? So having a great brand that looks sophisticated, that your nephew didn't draw on a napkin, is great. Having some testimonials and some traction, if you've got it, and showing that you've got expertise in your industry and that you have potential pipeline is great. And so remember that it's all about trust in the end for your investors, not necessarily your company. They want to know, an investor wants to know that you're going to do right by them no matter what, whether this company goes down, starts to go sideways, or something happens like COVID, that you're watching their investment and you're going to do whatever you can to make sure that investor gets a return on his money. Next slide. So one of the investors I follow is Paul Graham, and he talks here about any startup that starts during COVID as successful is going to be a great company. So with that, I'm going to close, go to Q&A.
Thanks a lot, Toby and Greg. Just wondering if, right off the bat, any of our panelists have any questions or thoughts for the for either one of them.
Hey, this is Doug Brunke here. I have a question. What Greg, you talked about was building a circle of trust, and many times the funding comes from friends and family. I personally have had bad experiences with that, and maybe it's me, but I think back when I was just a guy with a daughter, and I borrowed a car, or didn't borrow, I basically bought a car from my parents for $200 a month. Imagine that. And it was like 1 year or 2 years or something like that. And I couldn't get them to delay a payment 1 month because I was a little bit tight, my own parents. So what am I doing wrong here? Or maybe the flip side of that is, when you're working with friends and family, there's other things that kind of come into play. And do you have any tips so that you can maintain the relationship on the friend-family side along with the business side?
Yeah, there's a lot of things, and that's what we call governance, right? So as an entrepreneur, you need to understand how you're going to be governed by investors, and sometimes you've got to set the standard for how you're going to govern your investors, right? So up front, you need to talk about your flexibility and the understanding of how that investment's going to look like, versus like, hey, you're not going to just call me on in 12 months and 1 day and say, hey, I want my money back. So and that goes to kind of what Toby was talking about in terms of expectations of your board and governance kind of thing there. And so it's a tough mistake. I mean, and there's a thing called dumb money and smart money too, right? And so yeah, and in those governance and your notes and your legal docs, right, or your agreements, you do have to make sure that you have some mitigation so that you have flexibility with your friends and family, and so that when things go bad, you say, no, well, if you look at the document, this is the process, et cetera, and you have to live through that process.
Yeah, Greg, I obviously completely agree. I also might suggest articulating those worst case scenarios in advance and preparing for them. So, if I'm going to miss a payment, whether it's your example, Doug, or if it's more of a debt financing with an individual investor group, not a bank. What happens in a missed payment situation? If we're short cash flow, where should that cash be directed if we have to make a choice? Should it be directed back into R&D, or do I have to make my payment to you? What's in the best interest of our shared interests is a question I would ask. And I would come up with, as many worst case scenarios as possible. I've always felt preemptively addressing those helps to, dissolve tension. And when there's tension, a lot of time can be spent with the business owner managing the investor pool that they're working with. And that does harm to the business, because obviously your attention is diverted elsewhere. It may sound very simplistic, but again, I think I mentioned earlier, I've run into countless scenarios where, working with business owners where they're spending significant amounts of time managing their investors, and that is not helping the business. So address those things up front. Before you take money, no matter how desperate you are for those funds, address those things up front you're going to be better served. Your company's not going to survive if you don't, even though you need a capital raise.
I would, I'd go and so far also, if you're a new entrepreneur or you're out there right now, get an advisor, talk to someone that's done it before. It's going to save a lot of time and trial and error. I mean, you could spend, the first time I raised money, I think it took me like 24 months to raise something like 50K back in the 90s, which was, in hindsight, a waste of time. So I would definitely get an advisor, get someone on our advisory team and get advice.
Greg, I had a question for you back to your slide where you talk about brands versus ideas, which I thought was a pretty interesting dichotomy and a bit of a dilemma, right? Because sometimes you have much more experience with this than I do, but it just seems to me that some great ideas, really the brands are so new, there's no real equity built up into them. So what is it about the brand that gets an investor excited if, for example, it's just so revolutionary or new, or, I'm just trying to understand that dichotomy a little bit between brand and idea.
So an idea is Greg's widget that you've never heard of. There's no website. There's no thought leadership. If I look up Greg's widget, there's nothing out there. There's no social media. You're basically who knows what you are, right? I could be a Nigerian or a Russian hacker or a Chinese spy. So a brand has somewhat of a following. And the other thing is a brand has is a strong sort of visual element to it, right? So that when you see it, you're like, oh, that looks like the Global Chamber. Like that looks like a professional organization, right? It doesn't look like like someone drew a flower on a notepad. So I think that's one of the things. The other thing is that so a lot of companies that are, especially now, if you look at companies that are raising capital that started, let's say, in March or April, if you go and you look them up, you're going to see a website and you're going to be like, wow, this looks like an entity that's operating. They have everything there. They might not have a minimal viable product, but they may have a website that shows their team, probably shows their team together, probably shows the opportunity, probably talks about the industry, probably have an idea that you could log into an application somewhere, and they've started to execute on that idea. Versus the idea phase is really like, I've got a great idea, like I like the guy in the office, like a jump to conclusions game, right? Like that's not a great, that's an idea. There's nothing to it, right? The jump to conclusions idea is not really worth anything. So that's kind of what I think through, and I think through in the execution phase early on, you can really drive a lot of traction out there. You could talk through. I had a company that was building their application. They didn't start writing code until they talked to 100 people, and took the 50 best ideas, and then they started writing code. So they went out and talked to customers before they even started doing anything. Told them, like, this is what we think. What do you think? They got that feedback, and then they took it and ran with it. So that was kind of like, the execution piece, right? So when an investor looks at someone like that says, hey, we went out, we've done this legwork, then we started to write the code. We've done this legwork, and we've got orders, we've got people that want to use the app. That's execution of that makes that value, right? Versus having hey, I've got an idea, I haven't done anything with it. I mean, ideas are just ideas until you do something.
Yeah, Greg, a thought you brought to my mind regarding the engineers with that software maybe solution is I run into a lot of entrepreneurs, with what seems to be a great idea. What I've found is that if there is not existing demand for that idea, And it might be truly a great idea or service or product. But if they're not solving a problem that already exists with therefore inherent demand, in my experience, they've got an upward battle, because not only do you have to develop your product, you have to find investors, but now I've got to create demand for it. My experience is most of those business models fail. So solving an existing problem, either that has not been solved or with a better solution, which would be your differentiator, is always an easier path to me. I did see a question from Tal Zilberberg, Cesar, if you don't mind me responding to that, which is, the question is, do you recommend to prefer raising less money and bring the investor to be an active part in the business, or keep it strictly as a silent investor? So the reason I figured I'd take that question is it kind of dovetailed into some of my comments on identifying an ideal capital partner. So Tal, I would just suggest that if that individual has true value add, as well as personality alignment with your executive team, then sure, aligning that investor and maybe having them be actively involved with a board seat or possibly even a role at the company will further embed their interests and their investment, with your objectives. So that can be a good idea. At the same time, I would resist being bullied by investors to take an active role in your company, and therefore possibly taking you in a direction that conflicts with your vision and with your executive team's vision. And I've seen that as well. So it really is a very subjective response. It depends on the investor.
Yeah, I think the piece of having the right investor and the right mind share is actually great. However, it's entirely up to you. I mean, having an investor that's willing to put his time and effort, that has experience and a pedigree, is awesome. But you don't want an investor that's like micromanaging you and basically making your life hell. I think it depends on the type of person you are, and how you feel you can execute. I want to say to Bethany, I'll definitely take a look at your site here in a sec. But to Usamain, World Innovators Network, how do you launch your e-commerce platform between USA and Africa, and how do you pitch your brand to American investors? So I would, one, if at all possible, find a partner or find a co-founder or someone that's in the United States to build trust factor. And then I would also start looking for that ideal investor that does some sort of e-commerce and technology, and start to find, like I said, 60 to 100 of those investors, get to know them, target them, send an email, maybe send a direct mail piece to them if you can find their address. So that's the strategy I would use at a 80,000 foot strategy, and go from there.
I have a question, gentlemen, and Toby, Greg, either one of you could answer this or both. What is a challenge for a startup as opposed to someone who's had a business for about 3 or 4 years? Is the likelihood of getting some capital really challenging, or is it even possible? Can you elaborate? Give me some insights on that.
Well, to me, Greg, if you don't mind me just jumping in, it really sort of depends on, in my mind, the differentiators, how defensible, what problem is the company, what problem is their solution or product responding to, or what need. With startup money, it's going to be so much about a clearly articulated strategy. What does success look like? Ability to penetrate an existing market, hopefully back to my, solving a solution comments. Proven business models, if you're a few years in and you've even got revenues at that stage, it's going to be easier to raise capital for sure than startups. So those are just a couple things that come to mind.
Yeah, I think startups have a little bit of a unique challenge, especially when you talk about the financial pieces and that sort of stuff. So valuation is really important. And I mean, doing a real valuation, not just saying it's worth a number and doing that. So you're going to have to understand what discounted cash flow is and what that evaluation, and you've got to scale. Scaling is the most important piece for startups. How do you go from zero to multi-millions of dollars relatively quick? And angels are looking from anywhere from 8 to 10 times their money in their investment. So if you get an angel and he gives you $100K, he's probably looking to make $1 million in the next anywhere from 5 to 8 years, maybe even 3 to 8 years. So that's a scaling problem that you're going to have to address, and an exit problem that you'll have to address as well. I think startups are very great as long as you understand that you do have to scale. If you don't scale, you need the right investor that's going to understand how he's going to make his money in the long term. So, because there are investors that are like, hey, this is the long-term investment. I'm looking to make my money over the course of 10 to 12 years. So that's very different than someone that's looking for, I exit in 5 to 7.
We appreciate the questions, so keep them coming if anything's on anyone's mind. Oh, Doug, you're on mute.
It looks like it's a numbers game. So have you found tools or other tricks to be able to manage that several hundred people down to a funnel that both of you described?
Yeah. So at Aspen Capital Fund, we have an app that we've just launched, but we also just kind of have a strategy of how we do it using marketing automation. So we use SendGrid and we use MailChimp, and there's a ton of other automation tools, and then we put that in a HubSpot CRM. So we have a CRM that integrates into that, and then we have an integration to Sales Navigator. So under a single panel, you can see all your investors that you've emailed. You can set up drip campaigns, and then you can respond accordingly to investors that are interested. So there's a lot of automation that can go on. I think before COVID, people thought I was crazy to do all this stuff, but it was highly successful, and it's not very time consuming, and it really speeds up the flywheel to get meetings. And so yeah, it like I said, it takes 6 or 7 touches to talk to an investor to maybe get to a no. Investors don't like to say no a whole lot, because if they pass up on a great deal and someone finds out, then you look like the dumbest person in the room. They really hate that. So a lot of times investors don't ever say no. They just, hey, if you get them, the best line is, hey, if you get a lead investor, I'd love to come back and look at it. And that means no. So hey, I'd like to see where you are in a year. That means no. All of those things. So and it takes time. I think miss out on, and with automation, is that you can set up an email campaign after the investment goes through and just keep contact with the investor and just email him every month or every quarter. And they're jolly, because most investors, what happens, you give the check to the entrepreneur, and then it's like the entrepreneur does never want to talk to you ever again. It's like going to the dentist or something. It's very difficult. So, so yeah, there are tools out there, and entrepreneurs can definitely, they could go through this process themselves. Again, it's not hard. I mean, there's a recipe out there. If you go to aspencapitalfund.com, we have a capital raise strategy workbook that you can go through, and you can do it yourself if you really want to. But there's a learning curve. It's like cooking. If you've never made tortillas, it looks a lot easier than it is.
The other part of that formula is the deck, which you talked about, right? And it seems like 9 out of 10 decks I ever see are terrible. So what in the world? You've only got that little time, maybe 20 or 30 seconds to really keep, the hook in the beginning. What tricks have you found to create that hook in the beginning so that they want to continue to listen and then kind of carry through the process?
So here's the most important piece of the puzzle that everyone should get. Turn your deck upside down. So go right to the value, punch them right in the mouth with your idea, and then stop talking and go, what would you like me to unfold to you? And say, so if I have an idea, I say, I am uniquely positioned to solve this problem and scale to $1 billion in 7 to 10 years and we're looking to raise $750,000 from 3 investors. Here's how we're going to execute. And we've got a team to do it. What can I show you, Doug, that you would like? How can I unpack this opportunity so that what would you like to see about it? And you can say, like, tell me the details of the deal, or tell me about your marketing. How are you going to scale, right? And now okay, here's how we scale. And then you go back. So you kind of have like a large deck that covers it, but you're kind of talking more about it, right? So you're kind of you're showing him a deck, but the deck doesn't say much. You're just telling him what he wants to know. And then you can follow up with a detail behind that deck. So like, I'm going to scale we're going to reach, 36% of shoppers in this area. They spend $140 on this problem, and we're going to target and geo-target and retarget and blah, 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 blah. And that's how we're going to scale, right? And now the investor goes, oh, okay. And then is there anything else? And then he'll ask another question, right? Or you can go, okay, well, let me go through the deck, and the deck's maybe 10 slides, I think. And when we go back to look at the data, this is where there's a lot of data on how decks work. So if you look at like Gong.io, talk about sales presentations and conversations, DocSend, TechCrunch, a lot of these sites have data behind it, and they can tell, like, investors, you have their attention for about 3 minutes and 46 seconds. So we have people pitch us, and they'll talk we had someone talk for 40 minutes one time without stopping the entire time. And the investor's gone at that point, right? So you've poisoned it. I call that the $100,000 mistake. So think about losing $100,000 in 20 minutes or 40 minutes. So that's really the important. So there is a knack to how you pitch, and there's a knack how you send your deck. So if you send your deck, you want it to be like, remember, you've got 4 minutes, and that's it. So
love your response to Doug. Again, countless times you ask an entrepreneur about their business, and they'll go into a monologue and they'll tell you what they are excited about, which is great. And they need to be, and they obviously should be, ecstatically excited about what they're creating and building. But it doesn't necessarily mean that who they're talking to is excited about the same thing. So, opening up and quickly identifying once they've presented their initial idea, asking, what are you interested in hearing about our idea or our plan, our strategy? I want to make sure that I'm addressing topics that are important to you and not just expressing, what I'm excited about. So thanks for that response. It was, yep.
In going a little further also, like, the typical pitch goes like this. This is the company. Here's just who we are. We're going to build this thing we're going to put roads down. Then we're going to put sidewalks up. And then we're going to put light posts on. And then we're going to build a tall building. And then we're going to put restaurants on the bottom. And then we'll have apartments on the top. And by the way, the location's next to the water. So we're going to have this amazing wharf. And that's the exciting part. Well, I mean, nobody cares about the street, the roads, whatever. They're really excited about the wharf, right? This environment that you're creating. And so when you're presenting your company, say, hey, we're going to create this awesome building, this awesome wharf with all this great vibrant economy and all these great social aspects of it. Would you like to see how we're going to do it? And they'll say, yeah, no, I don't really care. What are you looking? How much money are we going to make? Right? They'll lead you to where they need to go. That's what I mean by turning the deck upside down. Because that's what you're talking about. Is you're going like, okay, where are we going to go here? The other thing is, don't read those slides out loud. Everybody reads their slides, right?
And identify your vulnerabilities right up front. Say, look, these are going to be our problems to solve. Put them out there and talk about them.
Right. And I always talk like, I mean, the best pitches are like, Doug, you have this problem with your car, right? When the tires go flat, you got to change your tire. Well, what if I told you like you could run 100 miles on a flat tire? We have this run flat tire. You'd be like, yeah, I do have a car, and I know they get flat tires, right? And so now you've drawn them into the story. They get like, yeah, I do have that problem. I've seen that problem. And if they don't see that problem or they don't get excited about it, well, pretty much they're not gonna say no, right? Thank you for the presentation. That was really good. We have another question here. Again, from how do you suggest you find American investors for e-commerce besides LinkedIn? So lots of ways. One, you can socially stalk them on Twitter or Medium or wherever they hang out. That goes back to finding that ideal investor and understanding them. Like, where do they like to hang out? How do they like to communicate? A lot of guys, some guys are like phone guys. If you find a phone number, call them. And I mean, really, you're going to probably have to invest in a list or get access to a list and finding those people that are in that e-commerce platform. And that goes back to finding you're going to have some capital to spend because the lists are not expensive, but they're not cheap either. So that's what I would do. Get the list, refine the list. So if you get a list of a couple thousand people, go through and look at the investors and Google them and make sure they're active in deals now, not that their last deal wasn't 3 years ago. Make sure that you understand that they are investing in your e-commerce platform like yours. Don't just blast it out, because you can blast it out to everybody and you can poison that entire list relatively quickly. So don't make those mistakes. You want to make sure you have a scalpel approach. Again, find 60 to 90 or 100 investors that you like. This guy has done this in this area, and this is someone we want to definitely talk to, and try to find a way to connect with him either through social media or through LinkedIn. And don't be spammy, and don't be persistent, but be polite.
Greg, I might also suggest, be efficient about how you're looking for investors. Find their hubs. If there are organizations that are industry centric, that aren't necessarily even a group of investors, but investors can be anywhere. They can be strategics also, as I've discussed at the top of the hour. Going to events that are industry specific or in complementary industries, and meeting people there. So yes, be direct targeted, as Greg is suggesting, but also expand into identifying, here's a group of people, whether they're investors or people that are in complementary or maybe my same industry, and where do they spend their time? Whether it's online or as part of an organization, a membership organization, and find those hubs and figure out how to slot yourself in to add value to that group of people.
Chris has a question. How long should you take to circle back with a potential investor who accepts to take a look at your pitch deck and one pager? I usually say about 3 days and make it highly personalized and have a follow-up call to action, like can we get on the phone and discuss your connection, your concerns, or discuss the next steps, whatever you want. But you want to be timely, and you don't want to be too pushy either. So and if they don't get back to you in that 3 days, and I would go a couple more days and say, I'm sorry if I'm trying to be persistent, but I also don't want to want to get lost in the loop, and be creative with the headers. I get the most response with blank headers. Like, I'll send an email to somebody and I won't send a subject line, and they'll get back to me. So I do that all the time. There's a lot of tricks to getting emails to open. I suggest you get good at learning kind of some of those tricks. I think we're coming to time here.
Yeah, I think we are. Greg, Toby, thank you so much for the great insight, and obviously a very relevant topic for everybody, particularly now, I would say, with the COVID pandemic. I mean, this is really going to be a prime time to make sure you've got your idea honed in, you've got your brand worked on, you've got the right connection to the right investors, because capital is going to be pretty scarce for a lot of people, and sometimes it'll be the difference between growing and surviving. So thank you both very, very much. Thanks, Jeff. Doug, any wrap-up comments from you or Cesar?
Well, thank you, everybody. I would be interested just to hear maybe 30 seconds from each as kind of a wrap-up, and also, what does COVID mean to this process? Are you seeing things change because of this, and things we keep in mind? Which 30 seconds is a short amount of time to answer a big question like that. But any final thoughts?
Yeah. So, Doug, so it obviously is a challenging environment for a lot of industries. And I would just encourage all the business owners out there to learn from what's being presented. There is always opportunity. Sometimes difficulty provides perspective to identify opportunities that you otherwise would not have seen. If you're an entrepreneur, you'll find a solution. So view this environment in a positive light. Maybe it means you have to evolve and change, but that's okay. That's part of being an entrepreneur to me. So, it's be positive. Sounds canned, but be positive, find the opportunity. If you need to morph or evolve, do it. And figure out a new way to prosper.
I think it's interesting how it's changed the environment to online, but I think that it's kind of accelerated the adoption and to an industry that hasn't changed since 1960. So I think investors are learning how to trust entrepreneurs in new and different ways. I think it's a perfect time to get out there, because there are people that understand that this is a time of opportunity. And before this, there was a lot of capital on the sidelines because there just weren't deals to be done, and it was crazy. But even still, nothing has changed. It's not like the banks broke. So there is opportunity out there. And if you do your capital raise and investor relations smartly, you will find success. It may take a little bit more time than you thought, but it may not take, it may take the same amount of time. It just really depends on how well prepared you are and how eager you are and how hungry you are.
Fantastic. Jeff, any final comments?
No, I just wanted to say it was very insightful, and I think our audience probably learned a lot. One last thing, Greg, how can they reach you? And Toby, how can they reach you if they have any further questions? You want to throw out your email?
Yeah. You can reach me at greg.tanner@aspencapitalfund.com. I did put it out there on the chat, but if maybe Cesar can share it with everybody, I'll put that out there for you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I also just put my email up on the chat as well. It's Toby, Toby _ Armitage. I guess you all can see the spelling of my name, at ml.com. And Greg, really enjoyed co-hosting with you this afternoon. Thanks. And thanks very much to everyone who participated, as well as our questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Ernie.